Hi, we will be presenting on the intersection between computer science and psychology, which is most of our majors. Variables are used in many different languages to hold memory. They are another way of stating a value so that you don't need to repeatedly state values. Additionally, they are extremely beneficial when calculating, as variables will remember the value you need in the future. Variables can be mutable or immutable depending on the language. Python, for example, has mutable variables. This means they can be changed throughout a code so that what you gave to one variable earlier may differ from what you give it later. This mutability can be both beneficial and harmful, as it gives us flexibility within our code, but it can also make our code confusing and prone to errors. There are three main types of variables that we focus on in this class. Integers, the first type, are simply an integer. For example, x equals 3. This means x gets 3, which is an integer. Secondly, strings, which are words, they are denoted using quotation marks. For example, x equals in quotations 4 would be x gets the string 4 in quotation marks. Lastly, doubles are decimals. For example, x equals 1.3 would be x gets 1.3, which is a double.
Conditionals or conditional statements do or perform different computations depending on a specific constraint. So they basically use variables to allow us to create a program that can do multiple different things. So when coding specific programs, it's highly unlikely that a person or a computer or a system will consistently respond the exact same way every time. So conditionals allow us to take into account and process a variety of possible outcomes. The most important conditional statements are ifs, elifs, and else statements. If statements tell the system to act in a certain way if a certain condition is true. For example, if x equals 2, it'll tell the computer to do a specific thing. Elif statements tell the computer to do something if another specific statement is true and the if statement is not true. So if x equals 3, instead the computer will do something else. And if neither of the ifs or elifs are true, or there exists no elif statement at all, you can also have an else statement that explains what to do in any other instance. So if you have one if statement that says x equals 2, or else something else will happen and x does not equal 2, the computer will do that something else.
Boolean logic allows for code to implement the notion of true or false. This concept was named after George Boole, a mathematician, philosopher, and logician.
This is significant because we can use true or false as mathematical values, which manipulates the way that the code is run and therefore the outcome of the code.
So how do these concepts in computer science relate to psychology? Through diagnostic tests. Diagnostic tests are used by psychologists and psychiatrists to diagnose individuals with mental illnesses. There are many different kinds of diagnostic tests, including multiple for each disorder. Scales consist of a battery of questions to assess the severity of a mental illness and are usually given during a clinical interview. Here we are looking at the Patient Health Questionnaire, or the PHQ-9, which is used to measure depression in adults. Now we're going to look at some code. So here we wrote code to perform the diagnostic test of the PHQ-9. The code begins with asking the user to input a number based on how often they feel the symptoms asked in each question over the past 2 weeks. 0 is equal to none at all, 1 is equal to several days, 2 is equal to more than half of the days, and 3 is equal to nearly all of the days. Then the code uses the input to ask 9 questions of the PHQ about depression. The user responds with the numbers 0 to 3, which are stored as variables. Then the total score is calculated by summing the response to each question. Based on the total score, Boolean logic and conditional statements are used to determine how severe the symptoms of depression are. Let's run through an example. First, the code prints out the overall question, asking how they have felt in the past 2 weeks, and tells the user to respond. The first question is there are little interest and pleasure in doing things. Feeling down, depressed, or hopeless. How about falling asleep? or staying asleep or sleeping too much, feeling tired or having little energy, poor appetite or overeating, feeling bad about yourself or that you are a failure or have let yourself or your family down, trouble concentrating on things such as reading the newspaper or watching television, and moving or speaking so slowly that other people could have noticed, or the opposite, which is being so fidgety or restless that you have been moving around a lot more than usual. Thoughts that you would be better off said or hurting yourself. I input a number of random answers to the question and my total score, which is 4, which leads the code to tell us that the depression severity is minimal. So this is just one way that we can use Python, including conditionals, variables, and Boolean logic to match with psychology.